I thought I'd found love again after losing my wife in a plane crash. Instead, I found a predator who was blackmailing my 15-year-old son while stealing my life savings. She had no idea I was setting the perfect trap. When she told me, "You ain't my type," at dinner, I just smiled, paid the bill, and walked away. What happened next destroyed her completely. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if I'd listened to my gut instead of my heart. Maybe if I'd been more careful about who I let into my world, into my son's world, none of this would have happened. But then again, maybe some lessons can only be learned the hard way. My name is Garrett Holbrook. I'm 41 years old, and I own Holbrook Hunting Supply here in Cedar Falls, Montana. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and it's provided well for me and my boy ever since I took over the business from my father-in-law after Lydia passed. That was 3 years ago now, though some days it feels like yesterday. The shop specializes in everything from hunting rifles to camping gear, and we've got a loyal customer base that spans 3 counties. Hunters, outdoorsmen, weekend warriors. They all know they can count on us for quality equipment and straight talk. I built my reputation on being fair and honest, traits my late wife always said would serve me well in business and in life. Ezra, my 15-year-old son, helps out at the shop after school and on weekends. He's a good kid, though these teenage years haven't been easy for either of us. Losing his mother when he was 12 changed him in ways I'm still trying to understand. He's quieter now, more withdrawn, and sometimes I catch him staring off into space with this look in his eyes that breaks my heart. I know he's carrying pain he doesn't know how to express, and I've been doing my best to be both father and mother to him, though I'll be the first to admit I'm not always sure I'm getting it right. The business has been good to us. Real good, actually. Over the past 3 years, I've managed to save up a considerable nest egg. Nearly $200,000 between my savings and investment accounts. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to make sure Ezra would have options when it came time for college, and I wanted us to have security. After losing Lydia so suddenly in that plane crash, I learned how quickly life can change, and I was determined to be prepared for whatever came next. I never expected what came next would be Celeste. I met her 6 months ago at a charity auction for the local veterans organization. She was elegant, sophisticated, and completely out of place in our small mountain town. Later, I'd learned she was visiting from Denver, staying with her sister while she figured out her next move after a messy divorce. That night, though, all I saw was a beautiful woman who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She laughed at my stories about dealing with eccentric customers at the shop, and I found myself drawn to her wit and apparent warmth. When she asked if I'd like to take her to dinner the following weekend, I said yes without hesitation. It had been 3 years since I'd even considered dating anyone, and Celeste made me remember what it felt like to want to share my life with someone again. The first month with Celeste felt like stepping back into sunlight after years in the shadows. She had this way of making everything seem brighter, more interesting. When she laughed at my stories about the eccentric hunters who came into the shop, it felt genuine. When she asked about my life with Lydia, she seemed to really listen, not just waiting for her turn to talk like so many people do. I should have paid more attention to how quickly she inserted herself into our routine. It started small. She'd show up at the shop during my lunch break with coffee and sandwiches from the deli down the street. Nothing fancy, just thoughtful gestures that made me feel like someone cared about my day-to-day life again. Ezra was polite but distant when I introduced them, which wasn't unusual for him. He'd been wary of any woman I'd shown interest in, not that there had been many. "She seems nice, Dad," Ezra said one evening after Celeste had left. But there was something in his tone that made me look up from the inventory sheets I was reviewing. "But," I prompted, setting down my pen. He shrugged, that teenage gesture that could mean anything or nothing. "Just different from Mom, I guess." He was right about that. Where Lydia had been warm and nurturing, Celeste was sharp and sophisticated. Where Lydia had been content with our simple life in Cedar Falls, Celeste talked about the world beyond our mountain town, like it was the only place worth being. I told myself that different didn't mean wrong, that maybe Ezra and I both needed someone to push us out of our comfort zones. The first real warning sign came during our 3rd week together. Celeste had offered to help me balance the books for the shop, claiming she had experience with small business accounting from her marriage. I was grateful for the help. Paperwork had never been my strong suit, and I was always looking for ways to streamline the process. "You know, Garrett," she said, looking up from the ledger with a frown, You're not maximizing your potential here. This business could be generating twice the revenue with the right marketing approach. I bristled a little at the criticism. We do fine. Our customers are loyal, and we provide good service. Fine isn't enough anymore, Celeste replied, her voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. You're thinking too small. This town is holding you back. I changed the subject, but her words stuck with me. For the first time, I wondered if she saw our relationship as temporary, a stepping stone to something bigger and better. The thought should have bothered me more than it did. As the weeks passed, Celeste began asking more questions about my finances. Casual inquiries at first. How business was going, whether I had plans for expansion, what kind of security I'd built for Ezra's future. I answered honestly because I trusted her, because I was falling for her, and because I wanted her to see that I could provide stability. That trust would prove to be my biggest mistake. 2 months in, Celeste started pushing the idea of combining our finances. She framed it as a practical matter. We were spending so much time together. She was helping with the business, and it would be easier to manage expenses as a team. The conversation happened over dinner at Romano's, the nicest restaurant in Cedar Falls. I've been thinking about us, about our future together, Celeste said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I want to invest in what we're building, Garrett. Not just emotionally, but financially too. I set down my fork, studying her face in the candlelight. What exactly are you suggesting? A joint account. Nothing dramatic. Just pooling our resources so we can make bigger moves together. I have some money for my divorce settlement, and you've got your savings. Together, we could really expand the business. The proposal caught me off guard. We've been together for 8 weeks, and while things are going well, joint finances seemed like a huge step. But Celeste had already proven herself helpful with the books, and her enthusiasm for growing the business was infectious. I don't know, I said slowly. That's a pretty big commitment. Celeste's smile faltered slightly. I thought we were past the point of keeping score, Garrett. I'm trying to show you that I'm serious about us, about building something real together. When she put it that way, my hesitation felt petty. Here was a woman willing to invest her own money in our future, and I was holding back out of some outdated notion of financial independence. Against my better judgment, I agreed to think about it. That night, I mentioned the conversation to Ezra while we were closing up the shop. His reaction was immediate and visceral. Dad, you barely know her, he said, his voice sharp with concern. Why would you even consider that? She's trying to help us grow the business, son. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks. Ezra stopped, restocking ammunition, and turned to face me directly. This isn't a business risk, Dad. This is about our money. Mom's life insurance money. The money you save for my college. His words hit me like a slap. In my eagerness to move forward with Celeste, I'd somehow forgotten that those savings represented more than just opportunity. They represented security for my son's future, a promise I'd made to Lydia that I'd take care of our boy no matter what. You're right, I said finally. I'll tell her no. But when I tried to back out the next day, Celeste was ready with tears and accusations of not trusting her, of treating her like she was just another gold digger. The argument lasted 2 hours and ended with me signing the paperwork to open a joint account, telling myself I was being a modern man who trusted his partner. I deposited $50,000 as a test run. It was the biggest mistake of my life. 3 weeks after opening the joint account, I started noticing changes in Ezra's behavior. He was quieter than usual, which was saying something, and he'd started avoiding the shop during the hours when Celeste was likely to be there. When I pressed him about it, he clammed up entirely. Everything okay at school? I asked one evening as we grilled burgers on the back deck. It was one of our traditions, something we'd done every Friday since Lydia died. School's fine, Ezra replied, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Then what's going on? You've been acting strange lately. He poked at his burger with unnecessary force. Nothing's going on, Dad. Just tired, I guess. I knew my son well enough to recognize when he was lying, but I also knew that pushing too hard would only make him retreat further. Teenage boys were like spooked deer. One wrong move, and they'd bolt into the woods where you couldn't follow. It wasn't until the following Tuesday that I discovered what was really happening. I come back to the shop early from a supplier meeting and heard voices from the back office. Celeste was there, which wasn't unusual, but she wasn't alone. Ezra was with her, and their conversation stopped abruptly when I walked in. Hey there, I said, looking between them. What's going on? Just chatting with Ezra about school, Celeste said smoothly, but there was something in her tone that set off alarm bells. I was telling him how important it is to focus on his grades. Ezra mumbled something about needing to get home for homework and practically ran out of the shop. I watched him go, then turned back to Celeste with questions I didn't know how to ask. He's a good kid, she said, organizing papers on my desk with unnecessary precision. Just needs guidance about making smart choices. Over the next few days, I tried multiple times to get Ezra to open up about what was bothering him. He remained stubbornly silent, but I could see the stress in his shoulders, the way he flinched whenever Celeste's name came up in conversation. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning when Celeste was in Denver visiting her sister. Ezra and I were restocking the fishing section when he finally broke. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to promise you won't get mad." I set down the box of tackle I was carrying and gave him my full attention. "I promise. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. It's about Celeste. She knows something about me. Something I did. And she said if I tell you about her taking money from the account, she'll make sure everyone finds out." My blood ran cold. What money, Ezra? And what does she know? The story that poured out of my son over the next 20 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd been sharing my bed with for the past 3 months. The secret Celeste was holding over Ezra's head turned out to be both smaller and larger than I'd imagined. 3 months earlier, while I was out of town at Hunting Expo, Ezra had thrown a party at our house. It wasn't anything too wild, just some kids from school, but things had gotten out of hand when someone brought alcohol. "I didn't drink any, Dad. I swear," Ezra said, his voice thick with shame. But when Deputy Harrison showed up because of a noise complaint, I panicked. I told him the beer belonged to Jake Morrison, even though it was actually brought by Tommy Walker. My son's voice broke as he continued. Jake got arrested because he was already on probation for shoplifting. His parents grounded him for 3 months, and he lost his spot on the baseball team. Everyone thinks I'm a snitch, but I was just scared you'd be disappointed in me. I felt my heart breaking for my boy. The guilt he'd been carrying, the fear of social ostracism, it all made sense now. In a small town like Cedar Falls, being labeled a snitch could follow you for years. "How does Celeste know about this?" I asked. "She was at the diner when Deputy Harrison was talking to Sheriff Williams about it," Ezra said miserably. "She overheard them discussing how they knew someone had lied about whose alcohol it was. She put 2 and 2 together and confronted me about it last week." "What exactly did she threaten you with?" Ezra's shoulders shook. "She said if I told you about her taking money from the account or asking me questions about her finances, she'd make sure Jake Morrison and his family found out the truth. Jake's dad already hates our family because of the arrest. If he knew I was the one who lied." I pulled my son into a fierce embrace, fury building in my chest like a wildfire. This woman had manipulated a 15-year-old boy's guilt and fear to cover her own criminal activities. She'd used my child as a shield while she robbed us blind. "Son, I need you to tell me everything about the money she took," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the rage coursing through my veins. "She's been making transfers every few days," Ezra said. "Small amounts at first, maybe 500 or 1,000. But this week she took 10,000 in one transaction. She said it was for business investments, but she made me promise not to mention it to you." I did quick math in my head. If she'd been taking money for weeks and had just escalated to larger amounts, we could be looking at significant theft. I needed to check the account immediately. "Ezra, listen to me carefully," I said, gripping his shoulders. "You did nothing wrong by trying to protect your friend, even if it didn't work out the way you hoped. And what Celeste is doing to you is called blackmail, and it's a serious crime. We're going to handle this together, like men, and we're going to make sure she never hurts anyone like this again." I spent the rest of Saturday gathering evidence and making phone calls. A trip to the bank confirmed my worst fears. Celeste had been systematically draining our joint account for the past 3 weeks. What started as small transfers had escalated to major withdrawals, totaling nearly $35,000. The bank manager, Rebecca Phillips, was someone I'd known since high school. When I explained the situation, she was sympathetic but clear about my options. Since it's a joint account, technically she had legal access to those funds, Rebecca said, reviewing the transaction history. But the pattern here suggests possible fraud, especially given the timing and amounts. You'll need to file a police report and close the account immediately. I called my lawyer, Tom Bradley, and arranged an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Then I called my old friend Marcus Webb, who worked as a private investigator in Billings. If Celeste thought she could manipulate my family and steal our money, she was about to learn what happened when you messed with a Montana man's kin. I'll start running a background check immediately, Marcus said when I explained the situation. And Garrett? Document everything. Every conversation, every threat she made to Ezra, every suspicious transaction. We're going to nail her to the wall. Sunday evening, Celeste showed up at the house with takeout from our favorite Chinese restaurant, acting like nothing had happened. She greeted me with a kiss and ruffled Ezra's hair like she was part of the family. The casual cruelty of it made my jaw clench. "How was your weekend?" she asked, settling onto the couch beside me. "You seem tense." "Just tired," I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. "Long day at the shop." We ate dinner while she chattered about her sister's visit and plans for expanding the business. Every word felt like sandpaper against my nerves, but I needed to keep her talking, keep her confident that her scheme was working. After Ezra went to bed, I poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from Celeste at the kitchen table. It was time to see just how deep her deception went. "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding business expansion," I said carefully. "Maybe you're right about needing more capital." Her eyes lit up with predatory interest. "Really? I'm so glad you're finally seeing the bigger picture, Garrett. I was thinking we could transfer another $20,000 into the joint account this week. Maybe even more if the opportunities are as good as you say." Celeste leaned forward eagerly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that separates successful people from those who stay stuck in small-town mediocrity. With that kind of investment, we could really transform this business." I nodded and smiled, all while thinking about how satisfying it was going to be to watch her world collapse when the truth came out. Thursday evening, I invited Celeste to dinner at Riverside Steakhouse, the most upscale restaurant in Cedar Falls. I told her I wanted to celebrate our upcoming business expansion and discuss the details of our increased investment. She arrived looking stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "You look beautiful," I said, standing to pull out her chair. Even knowing what she was, I could appreciate the effort she put into her appearance. It was all part of the performance. "Thank you, darling," she replied, settling into her seat with practiced elegance. "I'm so excited about tonight. I can feel that everything is about to change for us." She had no idea how right she was. Throughout dinner, Celeste outlined her grand plans for transforming my modest hunting supply shop into a regional outdoor recreation empire. Her vision was actually impressive. Multiple locations, online sales, exclusive partnerships with equipment manufacturers. Under different circumstances, I might have been genuinely interested. "With the additional capital you're providing, we can move on the Montana Springs property immediately," she said, cutting into her filet mignon with surgical precision. "It's perfect for our flagship expansion location." I nodded thoughtfully, playing my part. "And you're certain about the timeline for returns on this investment?" "Absolutely. My contacts in Denver have already committed to major purchase orders once we're operational. We're looking at profits within the first quarter." The lies flowed from her lips as smoothly as the expensive wine I was pouring. I wondered how many other men had sat across from her, believing her promises while she planned to rob them blind. "There's just one thing," I said, setting down my wine glass and looking directly into her eyes. "I need to know that what we're building together is real, that this isn't just about business for you." Celeste reached across the table and took my hand, her touch warm and seemingly sincere. "Garrett, what we have goes so much deeper than business. I'm falling in love with you, with Ezra, with the life we're creating together. I want to be your partner in everything." The words should have made my skin crawl, but instead they filled me with cold satisfaction. She was committing herself deeper with every lie, making the inevitable fall that much more devastating. "I love you too," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Which is why I've decided to trust you completely. Tomorrow morning, I'm transferring every penny I have into our joint account. $200,000. Celeste's eyes widened, and for just a moment, I saw pure greed flicker across her features before she caught herself and smiled lovingly. "Garrett, are you absolutely sure? That's your entire life savings. When you love someone, you don't hold back," I replied. "Besides, you said yourself that we need to think bigger. This is me thinking as big as possible. She squeezed my hand tighter. You won't regret this, I promise. We're going to build something amazing together. I smiled back at her, thinking about how Marcus Webb and the FBI Financial Crimes Unit were going to enjoy reviewing the wire transfer records that would prove her intent to commit grand theft. I know we will, sweetheart. I know we will. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared for the final act of this elaborate deception. I met Celeste at First National Bank at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a cashier's check for $200,000, money that existed only on paper, part of the trap Sarah Mitchell had helped me design. Are you nervous? Celeste asked as we walked through the bank's lobby. This is such a big step for us. A little, I admitted, which was actually true. Not about the fake money transfer, but about what would happen when she tried to access funds that weren't really there. We sat across from Rebecca Phillips' desk as I signed the transfer authorization. Celeste watched every movement of my pen with laser focus, probably calculating how quickly she could drain the account once the funds cleared. The transfer will be processed within 2 hours, Rebecca announced, though she was actually initiating a completely different set of procedures designed to alert federal authorities the moment Celeste attempted any withdrawals. Perfect, Celeste said, practically glowing with anticipation. Garrett, would you mind if I took care of some errands while we wait? I want to contact my Denver associates and let them know we're ready to move forward. Of course, I replied. I'll be at the shop if you need me. We parted ways in the parking lot with a kiss that made me feel like I needed a shower. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I drove straight to the sheriff's office where Deputy Harrison was waiting with a team of state and federal investigators. She took the bait. Marcus Webb asked, looking up from a laptop screen filled with financial data. Hook, line, and sinker, I confirmed. She thinks she's about to steal $200,000. Good. The moment she attempts to access those funds, we'll have her for attempted grand theft, wire fraud, and a host of other charges. Plus, the Nevada warrants mean she's going away for a long time. The waiting was the hardest part. I sat in the sheriff's office, drinking bad coffee and watching the clock, knowing that somewhere across town, Celeste was probably making plans for her immediate disappearance once she got her hands on what she thought was my life savings. At 11:47 a.m., Deputy Harrison's radio crackled to life. Suspect is at the bank attempting multiple large withdrawals. Moving to intercept. Through the window, I could see police cruisers pulling out of the parking lot with lights flashing. After 6 months of lies, manipulation, and threats against my son, justice was finally coming for Celeste. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You think you're so smart. This isn't over. I showed the message to Marcus, who just grinned. Actually, sweetheart, it really is. 20 minutes later, Deputy Harrison called to confirm that Celeste had been arrested while attempting to withdraw $50,000 from an account she believed contained my entire life savings. She'd been charged with multiple felonies and was being held without bail pending transfer to Nevada to face additional charges. It was over. Finally, it was over. The weeks following Celeste's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and slow healing. Marcus Webb had been right about one thing. We weren't our only victims. The FBI investigation revealed a trail of devastated men across 4 states, each one manipulated and robbed by the woman I thought I loved. She targeted recently widowed fathers specifically, Agent Sarah Chan explained during one of our debriefing sessions. Single mothers were too suspicious, and men without children were harder to manipulate. But grieving fathers with teenage kids? You represented the perfect combination of loneliness, financial resources, and emotional vulnerability. The systematic nature of her predation was both impressive and sickening. She'd studied her marks like a hunter studies prey, learning exactly which buttons to push and which weaknesses to exploit. Thanks to the federal investigation, we were able to recover most of the stolen money from various accounts Celeste had hidden across the country. More importantly, several other victims came forward, and the combined evidence ensured she'd be spending the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison. But the real victory was watching Ezra return to his old self. Without the weight of Celeste's threats hanging over him, my son gradually emerged from his shell. He started laughing again, bringing friends around the shop, and even convinced me to let him organize a party to properly apologize to Jake Morrison. I talked to Jake's dad. Ezra told me one evening as we closed up the shop. Explained what really happened at that party. He's still angry, but he understands that I was just scared and made a stupid decision. How do you feel about that? I asked. Relieved, he said simply, and grateful that Celeste can't hurt anyone else anymore. The local newspaper ran a story about the case that included an interesting detail I hadn't known. During her arrest, when Celeste realized the money wasn't real, she'd apparently looked at the FBI agents and said, "You ain't my type anyway." I paid for dinner, walked out, and never looked back. Even in defeat, she couldn't resist trying to rewrite history to make herself the victim. It was the final confirmation that everything about her had been a lie. 3 months later, I ran into her sister at the grocery store. The woman I'd briefly met during Celeste's stay in Cedar Falls looked embarrassed and apologetic. I had no idea what she was doing, she said quietly. I knew she'd had problems after her divorce, but I thought she was trying to get her life together. How is she handling prison? I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. She still insists she did nothing wrong. Says she was in love and that you led her on. The sister shook her head sadly. She's always been good at convincing herself that her version of events is the truth. I nodded, feeling a mixture of pity and relief. Celeste would spend years behind bars, probably still believing that she was the wrong party in this story. As for me and Ezra, we were stronger than ever, bonded by having survived and overcome a threat that could have destroyed us both. 6 months after Celeste's sentencing, life in Cedar Falls had settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The hunting supply business was thriving, partly due to the unexpected publicity from the case, and partly because I'd implemented some of Celeste's legitimate business ideas, the ones that didn't involve stealing money. Ezra had grown 3 inches and gained confidence that transformed him from a withdrawn teenager into a young man I was proud to call my son. He'd even started dating a girl from his chemistry class, though he made sure to introduce her to me properly and ask permission before taking her anywhere. "Dad, I learned something important from what happened with Celeste," he said one evening as we worked on inventory together. "What's that, son?" "That secrets have power over you only if you let them. When I finally told you the truth about that party, the shame lost its hold on me." His wisdom impressed me more than I could express. At 16, he understood something about integrity and courage that many adults never learned. The financial recovery had exceeded our expectations. Between the restitution from Celeste's conviction and the civil lawsuit settlement, we'd actually come out ahead. I put the extra money into a college fund for Ezra and invested in some equipment upgrades for the shop. More importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people again. The loneliness that had made me vulnerable to Celeste's manipulation was gone, replaced by contentment with the life Ezra and I had built together. I wasn't opposed to dating again someday, but I'd never again ignore red flags for the sake of companionship. Any woman who wanted to be part of our family would have to earn that privilege through actions, not words. Tom Bradley, my lawyer, had kept me updated on Celeste's appeals process. She was still maintaining her innocence and claiming that her relationship with me had been genuine. Her latest appeal claimed she'd been the victim of entrapment, that I'd seduced her into committing crimes she otherwise wouldn't have considered. "The good news is that none of her appeals have any merit," Tom assured me. "She's going to serve every day of that sentence." Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I confronted her directly instead of setting the elaborate trap that led to her arrest. Would she have returned the money? Apologized? Disappear to victimize someone else? The truth was, I'd never know, and it didn't matter. Celeste had made her choices, and justice had been served. More importantly, my son was safe, our future was secure, and we'd both learned valuable lessons about trust, courage, and the importance of protecting family. Standing in my shop surrounded by the honest tools of outdoor life, watching Ezra help a customer select the right fishing gear, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with having protected what mattered most. We'd survived the storm, and we were stronger for it.